Hey everyone, so what we're going to start by doing is actually installing Firebug. I've already installed it, but this is what you do. Just Google for Firebug, click on the link, click on the button, click on the download, right? And it's going to bounce you to a page. I could reinstall it, but you just say add to Firefox and sort of go on from there. It happens immediately, and what it does is it gives us an option when we're looking at our page to see things much more similarly, in a way much more similar to how they're presented in Chrome. So I'm going to choose Inspect Element with Firebug, and I'm just going to sort of look at what's going on here. So what I can see is, if you remember from the last time, it was sort of complaining about the format of my JSON. I actually think everything was fine with my JSON, and I can see from here actually that my console log is working, right? So part of my activity, right? So here what I had was I said, okay, console log my data, and then I wanted to add it to this div, add data to div, and add it to the page, add new div to page, right? Okay, so those are the four things that I tried to do. So the question is, so obviously not everything happened because I'm not seeing my data on the page. So what I want to do is I want to sort of look at it and say, okay, what did happen? What's the place where things are falling down? So I see that my console log worked. If I come back to my Firefox window, I can see that yes, in fact, that giant object is there with all of my data in it. So that's not the problem. That one is working. So console log is fine. The my data div, I think it's working. I don't necessarily know. I could console log out that div object. I don't know if this is working. I can check if this is working because I can see if there is actually a div on the page. So if I see that there's a div on the page in my HTML, then I can rest assured that at least those other two statements worked. So if I look in content container, so I see I actually do have an empty div here, okay? So I have the first one that I created in my page loaded function. Then I have this second one and it's empty. So the two statements that I used to do that were, okay, I created a div and obviously I successfully added it to the page. Something's funky in here, right? This is a really common kind of error to make. And in fact, I've obviously been doing this for a long time and I still don't recognize these things instantly. The simplest thing to do in a case like this is to look back at something that worked, right? And see how the thing that you're doing that doesn't work differs. So I'm going to look at my successful example here, right, where I tried to add something with HTML. And I can see that I forgot a crucial part. I actually forgot to say, by the way, this is jQuery that we're going to use this special HTML function. Remember that when I did it with JavaScript, I deleted it unfortunately, right? I had to use that inner.html. If I want to use this jQuery shorthand, I got to remember to do this $ parentheses things. So now let's take a look and see how we do. Anything? Anything? Let's see. Still doesn't look very happy about it, does it? Let's just see if I've missed something. Still getting that console log okay, but I don't know what's going wrong with this guy. Still coming up empty. All right, let me investigate further. Okay, so not surprisingly, I was wrong about something, right? That happens. Shocking, right? All right, so I tried to use this HTML tag, or this HTML function, right? Inner HTML, the equivalent of inner HTML. And I'm getting the feeling that actually the web page doesn't really like that. So I'm going to try to do it just as text and see if that helps, right? So text obviously being, explicitly text, there is no markup in this. Let's see how that goes. And when I do that, I see I get this object-object thing. Interestingly, not dissimilar to what I sometimes see in the console panel. So what this is cluing me into is the fact that actually it really doesn't like displaying just a big chunk of JSON. I've got to be more specific about what I want it to show. So how am I going to do that? Well, we know how we access parts of a JSON object, right? Because it's the same thing as a JavaScript object. We're going to use our dot syntax. So for now, I'm just going to sort of do an obvious one. I'm just going to take part of this. Actually, let's go into our first observation here, right? So This is a sort of challenge in reading our JSON object. So we can see that it's an object because it starts with curly braces, right? And we can see that one of these properties is called observations. This is where the bulk of our data is. Now the square bracket tells us what? That actually the observations is an array of objects, right? So if I want to print the value of the first object in the observations array, I'm going to go through this step by step. So I'm going to say, okay, you know what? I want you to go ahead and say HTML is going to be JSON data.observations, right? Because that's the name of the property we're looking at. And then because it's an array, the first element is going to have the position of 0. We can only use position for this, right? And then more than that, I want to get a specific property of that element that is called value. Okay, so remember we talked a little bit about the chaining that we can do here. So I have the main object, which I've given the nickname of JSON data. I have its observations property, which is itself an array. So I'm going to choose the 0th element of that array. And then I'm going to want to choose the value property of that element, right? So if we were going through and sort of looping through and showing all of them, we would do it a little bit, we would create some more variables and everything, but right now I just sort of want to check that this works, because right now it doesn't seem like things are going so well. Much better, okay? So now hopefully you guys can kind of get a handle on how we would do this in practice, right? So rather than, probably what I would do if I wanted to display all of this data, is I would set up a loop. And I could set up a loop where in each div, each time through the loop, I would create a new div. I would add that div I would add some content to that div. I would add that div to my content element and on down the line so that I could print out all of my data. We won't worry about that just now because actually we're mostly going to be doing something slightly different with our data. We're going to be using it to build visualizations, right? So if we think back to our initial example here at the Washington Post, we're going to be using it in a slightly different way. But just so you know that this is, a way that we can start to get things on our page and get out of that console window and really start to dig into some data. So I hope everyone has a great weekend. I know we don't get the holiday, but I guess technically a holiday today. And I will see you. We'll see you on Tuesday.